Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we are continuing with our weekly series of Shirim on the Zohar HaKadosh, where we're drawing down the light of Moshe Rabbeinu into the vessels of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And for our purposes today, the very text that we're going to be learning is exactly reflective of that same principle. Something that we've discussed and will continue to discuss over and over and over. That the light of Moshe Rabbeinu represents the light of Chachma, and the light of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai represents the light of Bina. Chachma represents the whole, and Bina represents the part. Chachma represents unity, and Bina represents separation. Chachma represents the world of Atzilus, and Bina represents the worlds of Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya. Chachma represents ayin and nothingness and self-nullification in the root, and Bina represents ani, which is the sense of self as it develops in its shlichus to bring Hashem's light down into this world. Chachma is above, Bina is below. Chub, Chachma is masculine, Bina is feminine, expressive and repressive, revealing and concealing. These two principles, which seem to be in stark distinction to one another, are ultimately the two parts of a whole that can only come about as a result of the conflict between these two parts. The battle, the machlokas, the milchama, so to speak, between Chachma and Bina, between the whole and the part, between the general perspective and the particular perspective. The general perspective reflecting the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the particular perspective representing the finite light of this worldly creation. That machlokas rests at the heart of all things. It comes down to and ultimately expresses itself finally in the machlokas between Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, the machlokas between Chachma and Bina. And ultimately the machlokas, the encounter, the contradiction, the paradoxical play that they encounter with one another is only there to reveal how both of them are unified in the light of Keser. But Chachma represents Moshe Rabbeinu, it represents the whole, it represents the water, it represents the calmness of Torah Shebichsav. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai represents Bina, represents fire, represents the vessels of Torah Shebal Peh. And every time that we learn the Zohar HaKadosh, what we're doing is we're drawing the light of Moshe Rabbeinu, the light of Chachma, into the light of Bina, into the Kelim of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But as we've discussed so often, the apparent descent from Chachma into Bina, the apparent descent from wholeness into particularity, the apparent descent from the ideal into the real, the apparent descent into absolute unchanging unity versus the ever-changing process of shifts and changes that represent the opposite of infinitude. It appears that the descent from Chachma into Bina is a degradation, and that the only thing that we'll be able to do is once we descend into Bina is to then go back up to Chachma. That we go from the whole into the part, only to then go from the part back into the whole. That we go from the light in the dark, and then from the dark we come back to the light to truly appreciate the light. That's the misunderstanding when we seem to think that the descent from Chachma into Bina is only so that Bina can then go back into Chachma. All it appears to be is a muted process of trying to gain something that's ultimately not resulting in anything new. Because if I go down from Chachma, which is the light of Moshe Rabbeinu, light of Torah Shebichsav, the light of goodness and wholeness and light, and I descend down into the light of Choshech, which is the light of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which is the secret of Torah Shebal Peh, which is the secret of concealment and containment. Now I encounter what appears to be the opposite. If my job is to just descend back up to the Chachma that I was at previously, then for what purpose did I just go through the entire descent and degradation and the slow and steady entering into the world of concealment? If ultimately the goal is to only be in the world of unity, then why go into concealment whatsoever? So as we've said so often, the goal is not to go from Moshe to Rashbi, from Chachma to Bina, and then from Bina to Chachma back again, as if nothing has changed other than our return back to where we already came from, but rather the descent into Bina, the descent of Moshe Rabbeinu into the light of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, is only there to reveal something new that could not have been revealed had it not been for both of them working together. That Chachma alone denies separation. Bina alone seems to conceal unity. The unity between Chachma and Bina reveals how within separation there's absolute unity. And that's the secret. We go down from Moshe Rabbeinu into Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai to come out again, but now we're not just returning back to Moshe, but we're bringing Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai back to Moshe. We're being miyached Moshe and Rashbi, which is the secret of Emasai Ka'asimar, the secret of the yichud between the train Mashiachin. And this is ultimately the encounter that Moshe Rabbeinu had with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's Rebbe, which was Rabbi Akiva. In last week's Parsha, we see Shlachna bi'ad tishlach, that Moshe Rabbeinu was a reluctant redeemer because he felt that he was unworthy of revealing the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world. Why? Because he saw in the future that there was going to be somebody named Rabbi Akiva who would have far more of a capacity to descend down into the particularities of the particularities in the various vessels of concealment that seem to populate this worldliness. And Moshe Rabbeinu, the light of Chachma, looks at Rabbi Akiva, the world of Bina, and he says, I can't do that. Bina should be the one to bring the Torah. The descent down into the particulars and the descent away from Chachma into Bina, that should be the place where the light of redemption is coming from. Why are you giving it to me, says Moshe Rabbeinu, give it to Rabbi Akiva. And ultimately, the entire secret of that process is to realize that everything that Rabbi Akiva has comes from within Moshe himself, meaning to say that the emergence of the Prat, the emergence of Bina, is from within the very recesses of Chachma, to reveal that they're ultimately not two separate things, but rather two halves of a singular unified whole that can only come about as a result of both of them working together in unison by way of their continued difference with one another. In the secret of Keser, which is the train Hafachim Benosa Echad. So, like we discussed last week in the Shir on the Mittler Rebbe, and like all of the Shirim are coalescing into discussing the same idea, that when we're talking about the relationship between Chachma and Bina, we're not just talking about pure Chachma and pure Bina, but rather Chachma contains Bina within itself, in the secret of Havein b'Chachma, the emergence of particularity that exists within the whole prior to differentiation, and Bina contains within herself a residual light of Chachma, in the secret of Chacham b'Bina, which is the remains of the original unity that continues to exist within the differentiation of Bina. So that we're not talking about two separate fields entirely, but rather each field, Chachma and Bina, Moshe and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, both contain their opposites within one another, and therefore it's in that point of convergence and in that chiastic structure where Moshe Rabbeinu gives over the chelik of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai within himself to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who in turn gives the chelik of Moshe Rabbeinu within Rashbi back to Moshe Rabbeinu. So then Moshe becomes both the Moshe of Moshe and the Moshe of Rashbi, and Rashbi becomes the Moshe of Rashbi and the Rashbi of Rashbi, and then there's a full unity between Chachma and Bina, and then, only then, is there going to be a full revelation of unity. And what we're going to see now is that the Zohar HaKadosh, the Raya Mehemna, which is literally the light of Moshe Rabbeinu within the Zohar HaKadosh itself, the Zohar HaKadosh is the light of Rashbi, the Torah of Moshe is the Torah of Moshe, but then we have a chelik of the Raya Mehemna, which is where Moshe Rabbeinu returns into the Zohar HaKadosh itself, which is exactly like we're saying, the descent of Moshe from Torah Shebechsav into the territory of the Zohar Kadosh, which is the world of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, is not to the exclusion of Moshe, meaning you can't be by Rashbi and Moshe at the same time, but rather the descent from the Chacham of Moshe into the Bina of Rashbi is to ultimately reveal the Moshe within Rashbi, which is a secret of the Raya Mehemna, which is Moshe Rabbeinu coming to teach us from within the Prate Pratius of the Zohar Kadosh, which is the secret of Moshe Shapir Kamart. And that, yes, it's true, Rabbi Akiva is the one who should really bring redemption, but Rabbi Akiva is nothing other than the differential representation of the mind of Moshe himself in the secret of Kach Allah b'machshava, that this is how it arose in the original thought, the machshava keduma of Adam Kadmon, that chachma of Adam Kadmon Kavyachol, which is the machshava keduma that we spoke about last week, which is Abiyas Adbrata, and the chachma that gives birth to Malchus itself. That's the secret of the mind of Moshe. And when we enter into the Raya Mehemna, we're entering into this very delicate process of the descent from Torah Shebechsav into Torah Shebal Peh, and then ultimately to allow Torah Shebal Peh to become the incubator in which an element of Torah Shebechsav that was hitherto unrevealed could now be revealed as a result of undergoing the friction created by its apparent opposite. Because in encountering friction and prevention, the identified thing, the Chachma itself, has to find within itself the capacity to overcome, thereby revealing more of itself from within itself in the secret of Pnimius Chachma, Pnimius Atik. And now we're going to enter into one of the most beautiful fundamental pieces of the Zohar Kadosh, in my humble opinion, describing the first mitzvah of the Raya Mehemna, the first commandment that rests upon the heads of each and every one of Bnei Yisrael. And it's revealed to us specifically as we're still on the precipice of Geula. We're not yet out of Mitzrayim, and it's specifically here in Parshas Va'era that this is coming to be taught. And we daven this every day. We daven the Yud Gimel Midos Shatorah Nidreshes Behem. We daven the Brisa of Rabbi Yishmael. We bring the laws of Torah Shebal Peh back into Tefillah to reveal that ultimately the descent from the Chacham of Moshe Rabbeinu down into the Bina of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Torah Shebal Peh is ultimately to go back up to the place where Torah and Tefillah are unified. It's only by way of the descent away from the Chacham of Torah into the Bina of personal interpretation, which are the Yud Gimel Midos Shatorah Nidreshes Behem, that a person can then come to follow through with the words of Rabbi Nassan in following the spirit of Rabbi Nachman's teachings and the Ramchal as well, in the secret of transforming Torah into Tefillah, which is expressed by David HaMelech. The yichud of Moshe and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai takes place by David HaMelech, by Malchus itself. And so we daven the Yud Gimel Midah Shatorah Nidreshas Behen. But why? Because all of the principles of the Yud Gimel Midah Shatorah Nidreshas Behen, the 13 hermeneutical principles, which represents 13 is Achdus and Ahava, as the Gra says, it's only through these Yud Gimel Midos that there can be a chibur, a connectivity between Torah Shebichsav and Torah Shebal Peh. It's this bris of Ahava, it's the Yud Gimel brisim that were given in order to allow the Torah Shebichsav to be connected to the Torah Shebal Peh. And it's given over to us by Rabbi Yishmael, who's the secret of Shmiya, the Ozen of Bina, the inner hearing of that hermeneutical process of drawing the prat out of the klal and uncovering the klal from within the prat. The Nazir HaKadosh, most of the Meforshim point out when it comes to the Yud Gimel Midos Torah Nedrashas Behem that most of them, Rubam Chekulam, are built around the relationship between the klal and the prat. And by davening those at the introduction to Tefillah, what we're davening from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that we should have the ability to properly understand the unity between the klal and the prat that comes about by the awareness of the difference that exists between the klal and the prat, and to be aware that the klal, which is chachma, and the prat, which is bina, the whole, which is chachma, and the part, which is bina, the descent of the part from within the whole, the descent of bina from chachma itself, is not simply to separate ourselves from the klal, but rather to reveal that there's a klal afterwards that's even greater, because now it can contain the prat within itself as well, which is the light of Kesser. And so we daven the Yud Gimel Midos Shatorah Nedrashas Behen in order to awaken the Yud Gimel Midos of Rachamim, which are the Yud Gimel Tikunei Dikna, which are ultimately the Yud Gimel Niman of Arach, which are ultimately the Yud Gimel Chavirta of Atek Yomin, which are described in the Yichud of the Dikna of the Yud Gimel Midos of Rachamim, to draw down the ultimate and unrivaled compassion of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that is dependent on no action from below to unify above and below. And so this is what the Zohar HaKadosh is going to say as follows. In Raya Mehemna, Daf Chaf Hey, Ko. This is what it is. This is the secret of Malchus. Lakachti eschem li la'am v'hayisi lachem la'elikim v'yadatam ki ani Hashem elikeichem v'goyim. I've taken you out as a nation, and I am going to be your God, and you will come to know that I am Hashem, your God. Zak Dehelig Raya Mehemna. Pekuda da kadma'a b'chol pekudin. This is the first commandment of all of the commandments. This is the first loving instruction of all the loving instructions as to how to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Reishisa kadma'a b'chol pekudin lemindele l'kudsha b'richu b'klala. First and foremost, the person must come to become aware of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light in a generalized way, in the secret of the klal. My b'klala leminda de'ishlita ila de'ihu riboin alma ubarin almin kula shmaya v'arya b'chol chalayun. What is the general principle of the knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? To understand that there is a singular power, a singular and transcendent power, which is the master of all of the worlds that emerge through concealment, who has created all of the worlds and continues to sustain all of the worlds above and below and anything that emerges from within it. The most general perspective, alt is git, everything is good, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everywhere. B'da ihu b'klala. This is the general application of the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. B'soifa dekula, and at the end of all things, when a person has come to the end of all of the pekudin, after going from the klal, in the end, what's going to emerge is the secret of the prat. Then a person has to come to understand beprat, leminda be beprat, to come to understand the HaKadosh Baruch Hu by way of the particular. The klal v'prat ihu reisha v'soifa, and the klal and the prat, the general position as well as the particularized position, are part and parcel of the unity of the beginning and the end. It's the secret of dachar v'nukva, of masculine expression and feminine receptivity. Kechada, they all function together as one. Ve'ishtachich barnash b'ha'alma alma de'istastek b'klal u'beprat. And a person finds themselves in this world in order to engage with the general principle and the particular, with the klal and the prat. Barnash b'ha'alma alma ihu klal v'prat. It's not only what we come into the world to do, but rather it is what we are. We are a klal and a prat. So what the Zohar HaKadosh, what the Raya Mehemna is being masbir here is that there's two perspectives. There's Chachma and there's Bina. There's the Yichud Ilah and there's the Yichud Tata. There's the general unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu referred to as the Klal, and then there's the particularization of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's applied unity within the world of separation, which is referred to as a Prat. The secret of Pnimiyas Torah, the secret of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the secret of Torah's Moshe is that we begin with the Klal. We never begin with the prat. We cannot begin with the prat. To begin from a world of separation, to begin from a world of disintegration, to begin from a world of darkness and symptomology and attempt to grasp God from within the self itself, one is ultimately going to get caught up in the thicket of it, and it's going to be self-referential, and it's going to keep us stuck in the same cycles of behavior, and it's always going to prevent us from beholding the illuminated unity of the Yichud Ilah. If we try and work our way up from the bottom without having ever tasted the top, then we will never be able to ascend out of the bottom. Once we start with the top, once we start with the klal the kula of Baruch She'amar V'haya Olam Rosh Tevos B'Shav, that everything is good, there's an equanimity, all things are good, bad and good are ultimately just reflective of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's light. I know nothing, I've never known anything, I won't ever know anything other than the Emunah, that's Kol El HaKol, which is that everything is good, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to bestow goodness upon creation and a radical affirmation of all that is. That's the secret of the klal. We start with the Yichud Ilah. We radically affirm that all separation is simply an imaginative principle that contains its own fundamental reality, but nevertheless, its reality is not like the reality that we assume is reality. It's a reality that is there to be undone and to be revealed, that it's nothing other than the concealment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, thereby revealing the grand unity of all things. Wherever I go, I find HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every place HaKadosh Baruch Hu is revealed, Simsam Enika Pshuto. That's the klal. Everything is good. No matter where I've fallen, everything is good. No matter where I think I can't pick myself up from, everything is good. No matter what the tendency to Yesh is, Ein Shem Yesh Ba'olam Klal. Even after I've transgressed the Isser of Aliyat Yesh, there's a revelation of the Klala de Kula. The Klala de Kula is the Liban Shal Yisrael, is the Nakuda Hapnimis, where everything is good. The Kodesh HaKadoshim, there's no bad there. Lo Yigaru Hara, it's the Nakuda of Atzilus within the Mensch, it's the Nakuda of the Yechida Shebenefesh. It's that place wwhere, from the perspective of Hanhagas HaYichud, there's no shinoi between anything. Everything is everywhere revealed. Hakol hu bakol. That's where we start. What that means is we radically affirm the good. We radically affirm the good. We radically affirm meaning. We radically affirm the wholeness of all things. We radically affirm the presence of God within all concealment. We radically affirm the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created all seemingly opposites. And in spite of how thick the opposition between opposites seems to be, nevertheless, they're all included within the singular principle of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's unbridled unity. And only then do we descend down into the prat. Only then does a person have the ability of going down into the separation, going down into those places of concealment to analyze and to try and grasp HaKadosh Baruch Hu from within the Sabrachan Kaidim, from within the lived experience. That's only after one has radically chosen the path of faith, which is the Klala de Kula. Only then does a person go down in order to know the prat. And the klal and the prat, these two principles that we're discussing, the chachma and the bina, they're also correspondent to the resha and the sofa. The beginning is klal, and the seifa is the end. The beginning of creation is chachma, the revealed light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the yud chachma kaduma, that light that was koilel all things, that machshava kaduma. And then once it descends down, it expresses itself in riboy pratim, the entire system of the Arizal, as the Rashash understands it, as explained to us by the Yamachach Shlita and his Talmidim Shlita, is that the entire process of Kabbalah Sa'arizal is the relationship and the interrelationship between klal and prat, and how ultimately it's not only that there's a klal and a prat, but within the klal there's the emergence of pratim, and within the pratim there's the retainment of the original light of the klal. And to understand how the prat emerges from the klal without denying the previous reality of a klal that's kol el hakol, but still allowing that prat to take on a particularized identity, in spite of the fact that we know that in its innermost point it's simply revelatory of the klal, which would retroactively reveal that there was no particularization whatsoever that wasn't part of the klal. That secret of unity, that secret of the interplay between the prat and the klal, prat and klal, which is what happens when we descend down from original unity into separation and then come out with a newfound grasp of unity that contains separation within it, which is the secret of the klala, the kula of Keser. This is al regel achas, the entirety of the chachma, the unity between man, which is the awakening of Mayan Nukfin from below, the awareness of the prat, as well as the mad, which is the secret of HaKadosh Baruch Hu being mashpia lamata, which is the secret of the mad and the Mayim Duchrin. That's the beginning and the end. It's masculine and it's feminine. These are the two principles that populate all separation in this world. It all comes down to the relationship between the klal and the prat. Kechada, they operate as one. And the goal of a person in this world is to process klal v'prat, to learn Torah, to understand the light of HaKadosh Baruch, to extrapolate from first principles into second principles, to be Yodea Derech, to understand the pathways of the Tiyul and the Sha'ashua between the Chachma and the Bina to the Chachma, to walk along the Lamed Beis Nesivos Chachma, and to understand how to open up into the Shvil of Bina, and how to walk B'Sha'ashua with the Tiyul and the secret of the Sha'ashua, which is a movement without purpose. It's the process of the Chachma and Bina itself of thinking. It's what we're learning in Shar Yichud, that all of thought is ultimately the relationship between the Klal and the Prat, as we're going to see in the Mittler Rebbe this week. And not only that, it's not only the occupation of the individual in this world, but rather we ourselves are a klal and a prat, neshama beguf. Neshama beguf. The neshama is the klal, the guf is the prat. The neshama is the radical affirmation of all that is right and meaningful in this world, and the prat is the ability to express that in accordance with the particularized aspects of the self. Tikuna dahay alma ihu klal the prat. The rectification of this world, which is rooted in the general and the particular, the whole and the part, the Yichud Ilah and the Yichud Tata, the Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and the Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Olam Vayed, the Torah Shebechsav and the Torah Shebal Peh, the nighttime and the daytime. The rectification of this world is dependent upon the unity between the klal and the prat, the whole and the part. Ubegin kach, and as a result of this, Reishisa dekula laminda de ishalit v'dayin al alma v'ihu ribon kol alma. And therefore, it is incumbent upon each and every one of us to radically affirm in the beginning and to come to know that there is a yichud of shlita. There is the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu not only created the world, but rather continues to be present in the historicity of the world and in the process and the governance of the world, and that there's nothing separate from the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'dayin al alma v'hu ribon kol alma. We have to know that. We have to come to know it. It's not simply enough, oh, it exists. We have to come to understand that it exists. There's still yigia, an effort necessary for coming to that place of the klal, and the work that it takes to radically affirm goodness. It takes a lot of work. It's a secret of yidia. A person has to go down deep into the work of doing that, as the Zidichover says. Because if you just accept yichud ilah at first glance without coming to try and know it, even though you ultimately can't know it, but you don't put the effort in, then it's going to go away and leave you just like something that has not been earned. But when I taste it by way of effort, and even if it leaves me afterwards, nevertheless, when I experience the klal in a real way, I'll have earned it in a certain way. That's the laminda, that I have to come to know the klal. I have to come to know that in the beginning of existence, laminda de ishalit v'dayin al alma v'ihu riboin kol almin ubara leila barnash me afra. And as the Zohar Kadosh earlier explains the relationship between the individual and dust, which is the dimyon, which is the afar de manakula, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the human being from dust, v'napach v'apoy nishmasa dechaye, and he breathed within his nose. He breathed within his nose. He breathed within his nose the breath of life, v'da'ihu ba'erech klal. The breath of life, the secret of the yichud between all separation and its root, which is the yichud of the nitzotz beis and the nitzotz aleph, of bringing everything back up to that place, that yichud of the tabraka, the gushpanka, which is the secret of that oirech of klal, coming to see all things as unified. That's the secret of the neshama, the neshmasa dechaya, the light of unity that expresses itself unchanged and unshifting within every element of the Seder Shtalshlus. No separation from the top to the bottom. And I have to understand this by way of the general principle. I don't have to prove it to myself. I don't have to descend down into the complications of it. I have to radically and stubbornly affirm it because I choose to accept that that's the reality. Yadatem ki ani Hashem Elokeichem hamotzia etzchem v'goymer ve'elmale pekudei da lo have Yisrael mehimnin b'chol inen nisen v'giburin da'avid loim b'Mitzrayim. The Raya Mehemna says something incredible. This mitzvah that Moshe Rabbeinu is now bringing to Klal Yisrael, that they have to come to understand the HaKadosh Baruch Hu by way of the Klal and by way of the Prat, was unknown to Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael had experienced the Pratim, Pratim, the Memtes Shari Tuma, the Memtes Shari Bina, Mitzrayim is Gvuros, it's all of the Pratim, but they had not yet tasted the light of the Klal. Moshe Rabbeinu, the light of the Klal, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Raya Mehemna, the light of Torah Shebechsav, comes along to teach them the Klal. He teaches them that Torah Tzivalanu Moshe Yaakov. He teaches us the secret that Hashem Hu Elokim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the creator of all of the worlds, and that we have to understand that all of the particularization that we just encountered, all of the Eser Makos and all of the Riboy Makos, that Rabbi Akiva goes and says it's not only 10, it's so many more, all of the particularities upon particularities have to be rooted in the fundamental klal that Moshe Rabbeinu Raya Mehemna comes to reveal to them. And if it were not for that fundamental klal that Moshe Rabbeinu came to reveal to them, they would have seen all of the nisim as just further proliferation of particularization information, and it would not have given them the ability to actually experience the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a grasped way. And therefore, we have to put the effort in to come to know that all of the separate points of light are ultimately contained within the unified whole. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu came to teach them, the radical affirmation of the klal kulo, the tzaddik b'emunaso yichya. Because Moshe Rabbeinu comes along, and it says, "V'yadatam ki ani Hashem Elokeichem." All of the Elokeichem, all of the pratim are rooted in the Shem Havaya. Hamoitzi etzchem. I'm the one who's taking you out of Mitzrayim, not all of the proliferation of particulars. And if it was not for this general wholeness of holding all of the pratim together, they wouldn't have come to a place of emuna as a result of encountering all of the particularities. They would have been ascribing it to nature, to whatever magical impurity was taking shape in Chachmas Mitzrayim, which continues to exist in more non-metaphysical ways but by way of thinking and all of these misnomers about thought till our day. Once they came to understand the general principle that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is manhig the Welt, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is good, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to bestow good, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes along and gives them nifsim so that they'll come to understand where it's all coming from. And only after 40 years at the end of the Midmar, which is the secret of Mem, which corresponds to Bina, that someone who's 40 is Shaykh to Bina, and the Mem represents the Mem Sofit is Bina, that only afterwards, once Bina fully congeals from within Chachma, then the Ishtabinu b'chol inun pekudin da araisa da oilef lein Moshe ben inun de misnage ba'arya ben inun de misnagin lebar me'ara kedin oilef lein ba'arich prat. Only after this original mitzvah, only after this radical affirmation of the goodness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that rests hidden within every particularized particular to the lowest particularized particular that can possibly be particularized in the language of the Balasulam and the Ramchal and the Rashash and the Leshem, that once we understand the radical affirmation of all is good and the all rightness and the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the fact that I don't know anything other than Derech Hamuna B'charti, and that everything has to be connected to the unknowable source, and ultimately it's going to be from that place that redemption arrives, in a place of Hesech Hadas, when I stop trying to understand the particularities, but rather I just radically affirm all things in their goodness, like the path of Beis Shammai, who when looking at the Kala, looking at this world, says Kala Kamoishahi, that the world as it is, you don't have to descend into the particulars, it's good. And only then can a person then go down into the particulars. Only then, after radically affirming and denying any knowledge about how or what, so that I'm impervious to any of the attacks that come about by way of the prat. What are you talking to me about a pratiistic problem for? I want to talk about the klal. That's the secret of Pnimiyas HaTorah, the secret of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh came to teach us. No, you start with chachma. You always start with chachma, and when you're attached above, you don't have to worry about falling below. If you start below without being attached above, then a person can fall and fall further than they even started. And ultimately, the secret is only once I start with the hanhaga of Re'iyas Hashem B'derech Klal, which is the Yichud Ilah. I wake up in the morning and I remember Olam Haba. I radically affirm my day. I say, Hashem, within this framework of conscious wakefulness, I am going to say yes to the world, and I'm going to be aware with 2 seconds response time prior than immediately responding. I'm going to create a buffer zone of calmness. When a person radically affirms the behaviors of that day, it's going to be a good day. Or the radically perform the goodness of 1 hour, it's going to be a good hour. That's the radical affirmation. Then I can go down into the oirich of prat, and that's only afterwards. Then I enter into the derech of Beis Hillel, which is kal noah v'chasuda, to find the goodness in each and every particular thing. I can only descend into the separation with the belief that there's goodness within the separation if I'm radically aware, or I'm mevatel myself to the goodness that exists above separation. Only then can I go into the oirech of the prat, into the derech of the particular, which is separate from the whole, the path of bina. That's only after 40 years. Hayom, now 40 years after, bring it to your heart. The heart is bina. The heart is bina. Draw that chachma and the klal into the prat, into the nun shari bina of the heart, and there the light of Chachma, the light of the Aleph, can be broken up into the light of something that is more processable. But I can't go for the bite-sized pieces without first and foremost grasping the whole. And then when I understand the whole, then I can understand what each and every prat is coming to reveal. They didn't have permission to go down into the particularity before this. They had to first and foremost radically affirm the klal. Ki Hashem hu ha'elokim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Elokim. Elokim, which is Gvura, Elokim, which is Teva, Elokim, which is concealment, Elokim, which is Katnus, Elokim, which is all of the things that make it difficult. It is reflective of the light of Havaya. Do ba'oirech prat. This is the path of particularity. Particularity is Elokim, and we're revealing the light of Hashem within Elokim itself. B'mila da kamarazin desitrin isbei. In this secret, how many wondrous secrets are there? How many hidden things? This is the secret of Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Lamvod, the secret of Hashem Elokim, which is the complete shift in thinking and the counterintuitive reaction and reality that it's in truth specifically from the way of the prat that we're going to come to allow the light of the cloud to be more magnified, and specifically by way of Baruch by Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Lamvoed, the descent down into Bina, that the light of the original whole is going to be magnified. But again, that's only after one has first and foremost radically affirmed the initial klal and then descended down into the prat in order to reveal the light of a cloud that contains the prat afterwards. And so we see here that Hashem Hu Elokim, as the Zidichover points out, and Mamre Chasidus point out, and the Arizal points out, there seems to be a theory here because Havaya is Zah and Elokim is Malchus, which really, on an external level, is going to be the Erech of Chachma and Bina. That theoretically, Hashem, which is Chachma, and Elokim, which is Bina, so it should be Elokim Hu Hashem, meaning that all of the separation is in truth unified. But why are we saying all of the unity is in truth going to be found in separation itself? But rather here there's a hint of Eishes Chayla Tarspaila, where Malchus and Bina ascend above and beyond Zer Anpin and Chachma to reveal that it's specifically through the prat and the particularization that allows the dissemination of the light of the whole to extend itself far beyond its original strength. Obviously, the capacity of its outgrowth afterwards and the particularization of Bina is something that was always already fundamentally there in a refined potential state, but it did not reveal itself in actuality until the congealment and the dinim and the kalim of Bina itself. And it's only after 40 years that this particular expression and this tnuah that comes to reveal the intensification of the unity comes about. It's only after 40 years. Today, in this moment, not beforehand, in the secret of tshuva, which is hayom. When I come to realize the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Elokim itself, that's the way of understanding HaKadosh Baruch Hu by way of the particularity. There's many secrets because the light of Yichud Tata is not yet revealed. The light of the Yichud Tata within the Yichud Ilah, the light of Having B'chachma, which we discussed, which is what Moshe Rabbeinu was seeking when he said, I need Anshe Nevoinim. He didn't want regular Bina. He wanted the secret of the Yichud Tata, that's Magdil the Yichud Ilah, the prat that allows the klal to grow, but not the prat that comes before the klal, God forbid, but rather the Bina that emerges from the Chachma and then goes back into Chachma to reveal a higher source of Bina within Chachma that's Magalil, the light of Kesser. And this and everything that preceded it, it's all one thing. The klal and the prat are unified. Da beklal, vida beprat. This one in the general, and this one in the particular. This one in chachma, and this one in bina v'ite mahachsiv. And if you want to say Yiras Hashem Reishis Das, how can we say that we start with the radical affirmation of the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the entire world, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Yachid b'metzias and Yachid b'shlita? We have a pasuk that tells us that the beginning of the path is with Yiras Hashem. Das, internalization, knowledge of God, that begins with Yiras Hashem. So why are you telling me that it begins with the radical affirmation of all things good? No, no. That's the beginning of the oirach of the prat, meaning the beginning, the klal within the prat itself is the recognition of Yiras Hashem. And then I descend down into the particularization. But the klal of the klal is the knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like we said, and the Zidichover is pointing out, there's a klal and there's the potential of the pratim within the klal, and then there's the prat, which is the light of the klal in the prat itself. And the light of the klal in the prat, which would be the chachma within bina, the chacham bebina, or the ab within the sag, that's going to be Yiras Hashem. But that's not the beginning of all beginnings. The beginning of all beginnings is to come to radically affirm the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A person doesn't have to be too frum, quote unquote, in that place to be concerned about the particularities. They have to first and radically affirm the general principle that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everywhere, even in the places that we think he is not, even after we feel that we've lost him. Hashem is everywhere. If I'm ever operating from a place where Hashem is not there, then I've lost sight of the klal. And if I've lost sight of the klal, then I'm operating in a dangerous place of the pratim because I'll come to lose myself. I have to return always, always, always to the klal harishon, to be choser and to be nichlal within it, to be included within the original klal itself. Ad va'ad bechlal, that everything is contained within the original klal, even the pratim. And then the klal within the prat is going to be the beginning of Yiras Hashem. I have to know who I'm serving when I descend down into the world of separation. Ubegin kach, and therefore, And once we understand that, we can say that no, really the beginningness of all beginning is the radical affirmation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'klal. And then once you're operating the realm of the Prat and you're descending down into that world of separation, so then the Klal within the Prat, the Chachma within the Bina, is to remember who you're fearing here, which is also a residual light of that original radical affirmation, because the radical affirmation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ever-present nature and infinite goodness is ultimately going to be a natural yira and an awe of wanting to do everything we could possibly do to bring about the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Reisha u'b'seif. At the beginning, the klal, and at the end, the prat. V'razada, and this is the secret of ani rishon v'ani achron. I am at the beginning and I am at the end. The klal and the prat. Ani rishon is the lofty radical affirmation. V'yichud ilo, the malchus ein soif kavyachol. That's the klal. V'ani achron, and I'm at the end, which is the prat, which is the secret of malchus, which goes down, 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 but ultimately to reveal the secret of malchus agnuza bradla, like we've been talking about in the Adir B'marom, the kula b'klal echada, and it's all included within one fundamental principle. V'raz echada, and one secret. Kivan the yinda da b'chlal. Once a person has this awareness of the klal, yashlim kol shaifu, then they can go down and rectify all of the particular parts of themselves. Man inun ramach pekudin di inun ramach shaifin de barnash. And then you can go down into the 248 mitzvahs aseh. But first and foremost, it has to be done with the klal. Kivan de ishtalim behu al haik b'chlal. Once a person has rectified the cloud, then they come to understand the Kadosh Baruch Hu by way of the prat, because this is going to be the healing for all things. And every sixth day, everything gathers together and it's healing for the body. And then it comes to that place of Shabbos. Say there. So we see from these Lashonos in the Zohar HaKadosh exactly what we're trying to do in this world. We're trying to radically affirm, and then from that place of radical affirmation, from that place of the knowledge that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is one, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Echad, and the Emunah Kol Zos, and that the highest level and the lowest level unite in their recognition that we don't know anything b'chlal other than Malchuscha Malchus Kol Olam and we only have the choice to radically affirm Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Olam and Choy Katov Lahetiv, which reorients the positioning of all that we do in this world. Once I understand that klal, which is that all that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to do is bestow goodness, then every encounter in this world becomes a way of looking and glancing and trying to find the nekudos tovos within them. Because this Zohar HaKadosh is so remarkable, Rav Shmuel Ehrenfeld Shlita, the Rebbe's Talmud Mufak, wrote in the second volume of his biur on the first simon in Rehovos Hanar, there's a mimer called the Mimer Klal V'Prat, which is fundamentally all about this and every makor possible and grafting it together in profoundly beautiful ways. And a lot of it is based on the Sateres Tzvi and Zidichov. And a lot of it is what we're going to see also in the Shah HaYichud of the Mittler Rebbe. And it's what we've been discussing all along. But I want to read some of the words from the Ateres Tzvi, from the Sar Zohar in Chelek Beis on the Chaf Hey Amud Aleph, in the Raya Mehemna. So the Ateres Tzvi, the Zidichover says, why do we have to come to know the klal? The reason we have to come to know the klal and not simply accept the klal of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ever-present goodness is because then we wouldn't have the levush to be able to hold on to the klal. There's becoming aware of the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is fundamentally unified in all matters of unity, and knowing that I can't know that, but just accepting that. But in that sense, I'm not going to have a true grasp of what I can't grasp. Only if I try and know it, and then I come to the place of realizing that I can't know it, I've still experienced the process of the Yigiyah, and in that way, I'm going to have a far deeper relationship with this element in my life. Hagam asher anuroim shakama moitzayim mitzias below yagia. Even though we know that there's many things that can present themselves in a person's life without the effort, and theoretically the unity of Hakadosh Baruch Hu's light, ba'orech klal, should be one of those. V'gam b'chachma nemer asher adam matzah chachma, and so theoretically we can have that access point to chachma. Amnan imlo biyagia ein hamitzia ne'eman biyado kinoyach la'avdam ki eino yishamer karaoi. But the point is that without actual toil for it, without trying to know and then coming to know, knowing that we don't know, like the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh says in the third teaching in Keser Shem Tov of Halavai Oisi Ozvu V'Tarasi Shamru, you're going to, in the end of the day, be ignorant, but you might as well be really, really entrenched within the Torah to come to that ignorance over and over and over and over with the Riboy Klalim, rather than just accepting that ignorance from the get-go, because at that point you're not going to have put any Yagia in, and then you're likely to lose it. You're liable to let go of it because you haven't put effort in for it. But if you actually engage with your das to try and come to know this, even though it's tachlas eidiyah shalei neda, you're going to have a te'ima of it. And in the lashon of the Sur Merava Asetov, the Zidichover says in his Hakdama to the Eitz Chaim, he says as follows. Why should a person have to put any effort in whatsoever? I should just believe fundamentally in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light without any descent into the particularity of it. And this is why the Zohar Kadosh and the Raya Mehemna comes to teach us to push this notion away from us. Why? Once I put the effort in to know what I can't know, and I could only have a muna in, at least I'll have a taste of what it means to try and know it. Because if a person hasn't put effort in and they say that they found, don't believe them. It doesn't mean that they can actually gain what they're looking for, but rather the yagia is a segula to be able to hold on to it afterwards. And the Zidichover continues and he says as follows. He also asks the question of by Hashem Elokim when it comes to identifying the prat on the particular level of the prat of Hashem Elokim. What does that mean? Theoretically, the klal should be Hashem Elokim because it should be that Hashem contains within itself all Elohim, but to say it should be Elohim Hu Hashem, that all concealment is contained within the original unity, but to say that the original unity is contained within the secondary concealment implies that there's something unique about the prat itself that's going to give access to a hitherto unrevealed element of the klal, and therefore there's a benefit to the prat itself. And on this point, the Zidichover asks and brings the Lashonos from Rav Chaim Vital by Yom Kippurim, and Zakta Hiliga Terasvi, Ulazeh Gam Kein Ne'emar, over here, Shalo Hayalahem Rishus Mekan Matana La'asus De'achad B'yichud Derech Zeh. 40 years ago, they couldn't enter into the prat. They didn't have the capacity of grasping the das of Moshe Rabbeinu and how it's halacha l'Moshe Misinai because it was too dangerous. This path of avodas Hashem, of finding a Kadosh Baruch Hu in each and every particular, it was too lofty for them until then. Of Hashem Hu Elokim. That implies that the Shem Hashem is almost tafel, so to speak, to the Shem Havaya. Amnan achrei arbem shana, after 40 years, at this point, they had the access point to start from the lowest point after they came to be aware of the klal. Then they could start from Malchus, which is the secret of Eishes Chayil Teres Baila. And then the Zidichover continues and he says as follows. That when we're really looking at the klal and the prat here, it's exactly like we saw in the Middle Rebbe. That nearly, it's fundamental to understand, ki dalacha achi, we have to understand, when I really properly read and understood this teaching, asher haklal v'haprat nechlalim ze bazeh v'ze bazeh. It's not just that there's a klal and a prat, but rather that the klal and the prat are fundamentally contained one within the other. Just like we said before, that within the klal, there's the emergence of the prat, and within the prat, there's the trace of the klal, and therefore there's a yichud minei yubei of the havein v'chachma v'chacham b'bina. And so what the Zidichover is saying, we have to see that the klal and the prat are nechlalim ze bazeh v'ze bazeh. Asher al derech klal v'prat v'klal. It's not just klal and prat, but it's klal, prat, and klal. That we begin with the whole, we descend down into the prat, and then we ascend upwards afterwards with a newfound klal. So it's chachma to bina, and then back up to keser, which is aniva ayin bevasachas. Ha'omer b'yud gimel midah she'atorah nedrashas behem. V'haklal hatzarich leprat v'haprat hatzarich leklal. First and foremost, that there's the klal that can't reveal itself fully without descending down into particularization. But then that particularization needs to return back to a klal in order to reveal the wholeness afterwards. This is the way in which all of avodas Hashem is situated, starting from the whole, descending down into the part, and then returning back to the whole that contains the part within itself, starting from the lights of Pesach, descending down into Sfiras HaOmer, and ultimately coming back to the Moichin of Shvuos, which contains Pesach and Sfiras HaOmer inside of it. This is the path of the Torah and Avodah. This is also explained in the Zohar Kadosh with regards to Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Dohu Yichud Echad. This is the klal. The Zidichover is aligning the klal to Yichud Ilah and Baruch Shein Kavod Malchus Olam Va'ed, which is the Yichud Achra, Lemehave Shmei Raz Echad, which is the lower unity, which is going to be the prat. The Raz Adah Hashem Hu Elikim. This is the secret of the klal and the prat that are unified together. This is the secret of Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal that are unified together. This is the secret of Hashem and Klal Yisrael that are unified together. And the Zidichover continues to describe how this is the entirety of the Darchei HaTorah B'chol Ma'aseh Mitzvahs Hashem. This is the path of everything we do. First and foremost, you radically affirm that which is good and true and whole, irreducible in its unchanging shape. What's the klal to understand the secret that HaKadosh Baruch Hu fears the Welt, the Malchus of Atzilus, which becomes the Reshid Lo Yada of the worlds of separation, to reveal that no matter how separate the Prat appears to be from the klal, nevertheless, they're all contained within that original whole. Klomer, the pratim are mishtalshel from the shlita ilah. They come down from the yichud ilah. The yichud tata is an expression of the yichud ilah. And then we come to see the unity of above and below. This klal needs to come down and express itself in particularity. The klal is the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the machshava keduma kavyachol that we discussed last week. The pratim are all of the seder hashtalshlus from Adam Kadmon and down. And the unity of the klal and the prat is the unity of these two things, all the way down to this world, the gashmiim. And then from within this lowly place, I can come to intuit through my imagination and to be madama milsa from within Bina itself, to reflect and abstract back from concealment, back up to the idealized whole. And I create the klal, prat, and klulim biyachad, and I reveal how the prat goes back into the klal, hu abayre, hu ayoytzer, hu aoyse, b'shtal shel abriya me'olam la'olam. And the klal is the creator, the klal is the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who has formed and created and made all of the worlds in their gradational processes from the lowest down, from the highest down to the lowest. This is the derech of the prat, and anything that is emergent in the world of prat is fundamentally rooted within the original klal. The yichud tata is an expression of the infinite light of the yichud ilah. Shenichlu kol ha'olamos, all of the worlds are combined together in the unified point in which I'm engaged in this moment. Again, in the lashon of the Zidichaver, because it brings us down to this moment itself, which is why the Bina can only be revealed by the secret of Hayom, as the Zohar Kadosh said, that only after we understand the whole can we descend down into the particular moment itself. The klal itself contains all that the prat is going to reveal, and the prat is revealing nothing other than the pure potential and possibility that existed by way of non-existence and absolute nullification, like a flame that rests within the source of light itself. That all of the pratim are emergent from the klal. Shenichlalu kol ha'olamos beboire kol ha'olamim b'nekudas asiyas hamitzvah asher hu oiseko. Because from that perspective of the klal, the entirety of the Seder Shtalshalis comes down to one singular point, which is Hashem Hu Elokim. And I radically affirm the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not Hashem Hu Elokim in the context of the derech of the prat, but the unity, the ein oid milvado of it all. The achar kach, the prat, we descend down into the particularities of Bina HaMitzvah, HaTorah, HaKadosh, HaTaryag Mitzvosav, the Imprate HaMitzvah, V'hilchoiseha, Kagoin Mitzvah Tefillin, Oitzitzis, V'shoifer, Kadoima, Shemestafim, B'mitzvah Achas, Hilchos Merubos, Kaharim, Atfulim, B'sarim, Mispashet, Mitzvah Achas, L'Mesivos, V'shilim, Gufei Alochis, V'amkan, B'soidim, B'razim, D'chachmos, Pnima, V'pnimian, V'hu, V'zehu Prat, Hadas, Darchei HaTorah, V'nesivosel, V'shvila, Shal HaMitzvah, Sha'oise, Be'eza, Oifen, V'derech, V'hanhoga, L'asais HaMitzvah, Kemishpata, B'chol Prateha, V'diktukteha, begashmi, uberuchni, ubemaisa, bemachshava, beniglos, benestaros, bemoichu, beliba, be'evarim pnimim, v'chitzonim, bedibor, ubemaisa. First and foremost, when I encounter a mitzvah, when I encounter an opportunity to be conscious in this moment of being aware of the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, every moment of his blindness and contemplation of Hashem's unity is this mitzvah itself. It's the first mitzvah. First, I contain all of what can possibly be contained in terms of the knowability of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light in this world. And all of the separation is elevated back up to an irreducible dot that contains all of it in pure potential form prior to its extension, that singular point that holds all things. And we radically affirm how everything possible is found within this simple thing. And then once that's been radically affirmed, then I can go into the particularities of the mitzvah. Then I can go into the world of Rabbi Akiva. Then I can go into the riboy and the particularization and the multiplication and the scattering and fragmentation of this worldliness that seems unending in its root, but ultimately is contained within the secret of the unending unity. That's why there appears to be so many pratim, because ein bechlal elamasha beprat, ve'ein beprat elamasha bechlal, and the klal is endless, and therefore until the ultimate lichud, it's going to seem that the pratim are endless because we're still sensing the infinitude of them all without being mevatel them back in the infinite source. But once we affirm the klal, then we can go into the particularities of the mitzvah. I'm going to translate the paragraph I just read. Then we can go into the particularity of the mitzvah, which is the holy Torah and the 613 mitzvahs in accordance with the particular mitzvah and its particular laws. For example, the mitzvah of tefillin or the mitzvah of tzitzis or the shofar or things similar to that extend into other mitzvos and other halachos and many, many concepts that are held up by a thin hair, and they extend themselves one mitzvah to the next, and they open themselves up upon the nesivos and the shvilim, the pathways and the circuits, the essential halachos and their depth and their secret and the secret of wisdom and the inner wisdom and the inner interiority of the inner wisdom. And this is the secret of coming to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu by way of the particular, to know the pathways of the Torah and all of the zramim, all of the nesivos, seha, v'shvileha, shala mitzvah, to know the mitzvah in particularity with everything that I can possibly know. And I can do it in the best way possible. And I can bring it into a unity of the physical and the spiritual and action and thought with that which is revealed and that which is concealed, with my mind and with my heart and with my inner limbs and with my outer limbs and with my speech and with my action. Amnan, but nevertheless, once I've gone down into all of those pratim and I've fractured that original whole and I've opened up complication for myself in the reboy of Hishtalshalis, Amnan tzarech liachid kol hapratim lekoilim bekavanas achas. And then once I've gone into all of the particularization, I have to again regroup them all together now with the intensification of the particularity into one singular kavana, one singular thought, le'elikim ke'el chai, le'boyrei kol olamim. And I have to bring it all the way back up to the loftiest place imaginable, and it's nisyachet hapratim haklal, and all of the pratim are nichlal within the klal, klal hatzarech leprat, v'prat hatzarech leklal. The klal that needs the prat is the emergence of the potential within chachma. The bina within chachma emerges into bina, and then the bina returns back to chachma to reveal the secret of keser elyon alav nikra, and there's an interconnection and an interdependence between these two expressions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light. B'prat v'klal nasa klal moisif ala prat, and then once all of the pratim are included again within the klal, there's now an addition, there's an additional adornment, there's a reification and a newness of infinitude that comes about, which is the tesefes kishut, which is the shift and the tnua within the self-same. Marbe kol mile, and each and every word expands itself. Ki prata mitzvah hamavur lefanenu shitfela leklal ein bechlal lemasha beprat. Meaning to say that even though we're returning back to the klal, nevertheless the klal that we're returning back to is never more than the particular itself that we're engaged with right now. Because ein bechlal lemasha beprat, meaning to say asiyas zois hamitzvah b'shleimusa mityached aboyre kol almin u'misyached v'nichlal b'nekuda zois hamitzvah bilvad. In the moment that a person has drawn down from the klal into all of the pratim and then back to the kavanah miyuchedes, so in that place, in that mitzvah, that is all that exists. Kol mitzvosai Amuna, everything is ultimately that innermost point of Amuna within each and every mitzvah. And it's literally as if nothing else exists. Everything is folded into that thing in that moment. Aval keshahaprat mitchila prat achar zeklal. But once I shift and move away from this particular mitzvah, which then represented the entirety of the world, it goes back and remains a particularized mitzvah, but that particularity, the light of particularity, includes itself within the secret of the whole. And the soif maisa mitzvah, when I'm done with that particular mitzvah, which held the entirety of existence within it, nasa prat ikr, when that mitzvah became the ikr, and the klal moisif alav b'schar mitzvah achas nechlalu kol mitzvahs kulam kol olamus v'prat beroisha beikr v'klal l'toisefes bracha v'zeu tachlis avodas kol mitzvahs ein dai be'er. All of the pratim have to come back into that unified klal. And then that particular prat is unified with the klal. And that's the secret of the klal that needs the prat to express its fullness, and the prat that wants to express itself in the klal afterwards. And once that prat, that separation, that differentiation returns back to a newfound unity, when the prat is unified with the klal and it becomes a klal that adds to the original prat, which is the light of Keser, Umarbe kol mile, and that original prat has now extended in itself and revealed more infinitude within itself, specifically within concealment. Why? Why is the prat now taking on new light? Because whatever it is that a person is engaged with right in front of themselves, because when I'm engaged in this mitzvah, I'm operating with the secret of Ein Beklal Elamasha Beprat, meaning that the prat right now reveals the entirety of the klal. Kloimar, meaning to say, Asiyas Zoisa mitzvah b'shlemu. So when I'm engaged in the wholeness of this mitzvah, Misyached Abayra Kal Almin, Misyached V'nichlal B'nekuda Zoisa mitzvah bilvad. In this prat, the light of the klal is now expressed. Aval kisha prat mitchila prat achar zeh klal. Once this prat of the mitzvah has been done, and I've descended into the realm of bina and separation, once it's completed its task and connected to the light of the klal, the prat becomes the ikr, and the klal is moisif alav, and the light of the klal reveals the radical secret of how from within the yichud tata there's going to be the retainment of a yichud ilah, but it's specifically from the bottom that there's going to be more revealed. And at that place, this prat, this edging out, this jutting out of the leg of the tuft, which adds upon the original whole, that becomes the essential place. And the original klal is the addition of bracha. The Zidichover goes on. The Zidichover has many, many teachings on this particular Zohar Kadosh, which we'll go through Be'ezus Hashem one day when we learn from Rav Shmuel's Maimer. This last part of the Zidichover is fundamental, but I did not explain it clear enough, so I'll share pictures of it, and everybody should learn the Ateres V inside. But Be'ezus Hashem, we should be zoichet to make klalim in our lives, to understand what the original klal is, to wake up in the morning and radically affirm goodness and our ability to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then to descend down into the particular ways in which we draw out the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then at the end, not to get caught up with the particular, but to allow all of the particulars and the separation to emerge in a newfound wholeness, which is a wholeness that contains the separation within it, where separation is revealed to be, in fact, an even stronger revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's original wholeness. And we're still finding ourselves in the Meitzarim, in the descent into Mitzrayim, in the concealment and the darkness, and it's specifically there that the Kalim and the Riboy Kalim are going to emerge, so that there's going to be the unification of the Klal and the Prat, and it's going to be the Giloy of Kaiser, the Chatzi Kaiser, which is the Klal and the Prat, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, in the secret of Moshe Rabbeinu, that's Kol Train Mashiachin, that he contains Rabbi Akiva within himself, in the secret of Emasai Kasimar, of Moshe Rabbeinu and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, joining together to reveal healing, to reveal the capacity of the Torah to speak to the lowest places imaginable, to speak to those places that are broken and hurt, and to speak to those places that feel so stuck within the Pratius and so disconnected from the Klal, but to allow the light of the Klal to penetrate down even there, so that for a moment the Prat can remember for a second, I'm part of a klal, and not only that, if I'm part of a klal, I contain the klal within myself, because we know that the klal and the prat are ultimately shavin. That's the secret of the Rashash and the Torah's Chacham, something that is emergent from within the pages of the Zohar Kadosh Avada and the Ateres V'Avada, but fully explicated in more of the kind of mathematical language than of the Rashash and the Torah's Chacham, which Be'ezus Hashem we will be zochet to connect to soon.